Hello again and welcome to Elizabeth Hogarth Designs. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a wide selection of cards using some of my favourite stamps and dies. They are based on a set of watercolour backgrounds which I will show you how I created later on in the video, but you can see from the cards that I've made that you will be able to make very striking cards using pretty simple techniques. So I have used my Better Press as well and my embossing folders, but the majority of the cards are based on large stamps and open cutting dies, and I would love to share with you some of my top hints and tips to not only be bold with the colours that you're using, but not to worry too much if things go wrong, because really that's where your best projects will end up coming from. So without further ado, I will take you through the process of making up the inks in order to create the backgrounds for this beautiful set of cards. The cardstock that I'm using for these cards are from some of my older watercolour pads. This is a very thick watercolour card that is rather like a Bockingford. It's quite thick and takes water really well, but later on I'll show you a second watercolour painting pad that I was able to get some really cool results with as well. But you're looking for a decent quality watercolour paper or card that will happily take waters. Now I'm using the Pink Ink Designs watercolour inks. They come with a handy pipette, and all I'm going to do is to drop a few lines and a few dots here and there at the base of the card, and with any luck, once I add some water, it will activate all of the colours. This part is all about playing. You get different results every single time, so not only am I using the Pink Ink Designs inks, I'm also going to be bringing in some brush shows. I should say that some of the techniques work better than others. I personally found it easier to drop the ink directly onto the water and watch it disperse. The first couple of tries that I had didn't really work in the way that I imagined. I added too much ink and the colours were too dark to begin with, but I'm not going to throw any of this away because I can use it as any type of background. I didn't add water all the way to the sides because I wanted to give myself a border to allow the inks to sit within. So you can see I've had to change my water. I'm going to move the paper around and try and disperse some of these colours. This would work, you could absolutely leave this as is, but I then moved on and added dots of colour to the water with I think greater success. So I spent probably an hour and a half creating these backgrounds. I've had a busy few weeks creating design team samples, and I wanted to create some arty random projects just to remind myself what it is to create with the tools that I have in my craft room. So don't go out and buy lots of fancy things. Use these ideas and adapt what you have, and I'm sure you too will end up with some fabulous cards, and you'll also have a great couple of hours playing. So from this point on I will slightly speed up the filming because, as I say, this probably would take 2 to 3 hours in total if I filmed everything in real time. But I hope you'll have a little bit of fun looking at the ink patterns and seeing the different results that you can get. If you have any specific questions to the ink dropping techniques, then leave them in the comments below. I'll try and be more specific with individual questions, but really all I'm doing is playing. I'm adding water every single time to some watercolour cardstock, and then I'm dropping the inks and the brush goes in to see the results that I can achieve. This is the second watercolour paper pad I was using. It's a Faber-Castell brand. Again, it takes water really well, and all I'm doing again is just experimenting with the different colours and watching to see how they mix up with one another. By this stage I was using less colours on one sheet, keeping within the colour families, and then in some cases I was going for complete different colours on the spectrum. So an orange would go with a green and a purple would go with a yellow, that kind of thing. I think that less is more. Try not to go overboard with the colours. I did get better as I went along. I tend to make 10 or 12 backgrounds all in one go. So once the inks are out, I set myself up and then I keep making backgrounds and then laying them out to dry. I leave them to dry naturally, because I find that I like the way that the colours develop the longer that you leave them to dry, and it's always quite exciting to come back in and see what has happened, because at this stage you think everything is a real mess, but trust the process and just keep going with all the different colours and trying the different styles that appeal to you. There's quite a lot of water pooling on some of these, so sometimes I remove it with paper, and then other times I will blot away the extra, and of course that extra piece of paper will then give me another background, so nothing goes to waste. I am a blue and green kind of person. I do enjoy the natural colours of blue and yellow, so I did try really hard here to go with some reds and some pinks, but naturally my ink palette goes towards the blues. So you'll see from the cards that I make that I did share out the colours in the end. So here we have the big block of backgrounds that I created. You can see that I've got a very random selection of patterns. You can see landscapes in here. This one is very watery in its look. And then you've got the bolder pinks and reds that will be great for butterflies and flowers. And you'll see later on that these will become backgrounds to cards using stamps, and then I will also use my die cuts to cut into and use the wide array of colours that I created. This one here looks like a volcano erupting, and a lot of the times the patterns that I thought really wouldn't work have come out and turned out to be the most successful. Some of these are the wipe up the excess papers. That one's a very hot and fiery colour palette. And then we've got some smaller pieces here. And then this is another one where I let the green overtake the purples. This one here looks like the Aurora Borealis, which is very apt because lots of the people in the UK saw sightings of those this week. So now that all the backgrounds are prepared, I personally now cut them all down and start thinking about how I'm going to use them as backgrounds. I find that by cutting them down into smaller pieces, I can begin to hone in on the designs that I want to use. So quite often I will see a landscape and I will think, oh, I'll use one of my largest stamps to create a background for that, whereas the ones with the bolder colours I would tend to use for butterflies and flowers and the toppers that I'm going to include in my cards. Everyone has their own ways of doing things, but for this particular set of cards I ended up repeating the same process at each stage. Not only do I have a set of backgrounds that are ready to go, I keep all of these strips that you can see on the right. And these will come in handy for sentiments and for creating the scrap cards that I like to make. So once all of the backgrounds are ready, it's time to take a very quick look at the stamps that we will be working with today. I've got a wide range of stamps from UK based companies. So I've got All and Create, I've got Cat King Crafts, which is one of my favourites. I like the artiness of these designs and they work well with the Pink Ink Watercolours. And then we've got some Studio Light stamps. These are older stamps that I've got. Another Pink Ink, we've got some butterflies here, and then a classic Tim Holtz. So I was going to use these background pieces, and really all I'm looking for are open designs, and by that I mean things where you will see the colour behind the artwork. So pick your designs and then you're ready to get stamping and creating your backgrounds. So for card number 1 we're working with the colours on the background. So you've got the pinks here, and really what I'm trying to do is to work out where the colour will be for the butterfly. I want the butterfly to be bolder, so I'm placing the stamp against the background until to my eye I like the colour that the butterfly is going to be. I don't want it to be one colour, but I want the background to be less prominent than the wings of the butterfly. I use my die cuts as temporary frames so that I know the way that I'm going with the design, and here I'm stamping the butterfly wings again just to add another dimension. In reality I stamped everything in one go, but here's card number 1 so that you can see the end results as we go along. So you can see that I use the circular die cut to frame the background, and then I cut the butterfly out by hand, and then I layered it up with some glue gel, and I think that the colour palette of the red and the green and the purple work really well together. So that's one simple card design using the background stamps and circular cutting dies. This is card number 2 and it's a similar sort of technique, but I'm using the main part of the design as a bigger topper. So to begin with I'm using the dirtier area, if you like, of the colour as my background, and then I'm going to go in again and I'm going to make a real clean and crisp print, and this one here will become my topper. So I'm looking at the shapes within the design and I'm actively deciding where I want my large topper to be. I'm also going to use some of the sentiments here. They actually end up being part of the background, but I wanted to have the same colour palette as an option when I came to add my sentiments. So I'm using a Spellbinder's die here, and this is another top tip, is I use the frames as I go along to think about how I want to put the card together. So I'm back in, I'm stamping all of the sentiments, and I've got 2 copies of this large intricate stamp. And then all that will happen is I will die cut one as a background, and then I will go back in and really think about how I want to use the topper. So really I'm making the stamp and the colours do all the work for me. I will also add some white ink just to add some extra detail. So here's card number 2 finished. So you can see I used the stamp design. You can see how much of the stamp design I incorporated into the card, and then I used 2 or 3 layers of the dies to create the card base, the background and the smaller frame for the topper itself. The vibrancy of the colours comes across on camera, I hope, because this is a really bright and bold card, and it's not something that I would ordinarily create by eye or pick as a background, but I really like the end result. So that's card number 2, where you're using a large topper from the same background stamp. For card number 3, I'm using the colour palette of the background as a means to colour in a very detailed stamp. So this is my water themed background. If you look closely, you can imagine that it's like water lilies or the sky in the background. So here I've got the Cat King Crafts stamp, and I'm going to be using the brighter blue ink to add the detail. Rather than black, I'm going in with a colour because I wanted to keep the palette softer, and I added the stamp to the area where I felt that I would be able to replicate the colours of the lady's costume. So you can see that I'm imagining the flow of the dress and where the wings would be. And then I'm also going to use the paler section at the top for one of the sentiments that I will cut out by hand. I was quite careful of the area that I used for this because I wanted to make a second card, and I'll show you more of that in a moment. But this is a superb stamp set, and it works really well with these pale pinks and greens. Here we will have cards 3 and 4. This is the ethereal fairy. I think the colour palette works really well with this stamp. In hindsight, I think I would have gone back in and tried a bleaching technique and taken away some of the colour of the face, but I really love it as a stamp, and I'm really pleased with the way that the colours worked. Then I used the excess piece to cut a tag which was rather similar to a background of a forest, and then I used a set of trees for Anna Marie designs to create a really simple tag idea. So you could leave it as a tag, but it's really handy to be able to use your die cut pieces to create your own toppers, so you don't have to stamp everything. And you can see that I've used some of the excess pieces from the stamps that I've used already. So 2 more beautiful cards. So now moving on to card number 5. And again I'm beginning with a background stamp. In my mind I was going to create a card using a bolder daisy in the foreground, but it didn't really work as I imagined. So I've kept all the pieces and I'll show you how I developed the card. So I've got the background piece and then I've stamped the tickets several times. I was going to build these up, but I didn't like the results that I was getting. So rather than dismissing it altogether, I worked with the parts that I did like. So here you'll see me stamping again on a ready-made piece of coloured background. And the idea was that I was going to use the bolder daisies on the front of the ink design. But you'll see this is the finished card, and I went with the main background, but I used the colour of the yellow as a background die cut, and then the tickets themselves formed the main toppers. So it's always worth playing with the results that you end up with. So I've got a second piece here where I stamped like a notebook page, and then I can use this in a journal. So these don't have to be cards, you can use them within your album and your journal making. It's whatever works for you really. So that card was almost successful, but I still quite like it. But now on to another card that I really did like. And here I wanted to show that you can really work with opposite colours of the spectrum. So I'm working with a bright green and a bright pink, and often you would say pink and green should never be seen, but in this particular case they work really well together. It creates really vibrant results. So I've got a large All and Create die, and I'm deciding how big I want the card itself to be. So I've stamped out the background and I'm trying to work out how big I want the frame to be in order to give me a large enough background with the stamp on, but will also house the foreground topper in this bright pink and purple. So it's a simple idea, but by using these opposite colours you end up with a really bright and vibrant result. So I'm laying out these stamps so that I've got a good surrounding area to the toadstools themselves, and this stamped out really well. Was really pleased with the result, and you'll see from the cards just how attractive these colourways can be together. So here's the larger one of the card, so you can see you've got that green background that is actually lined up with the foreground, so it's a bit of an illusion because you think that it's all separate, but the card design is the same, so it's almost as if you stamped it all in one go. So the outer frame is in the green, and then the centre part has been cut out with the smaller panel in the pinks and the purples. And you can see again that by taking that green background, exactly the same background, but then stamping and cutting away the toadstools, you've got this opposite attracts card. And I think that these two cards in particular work really well together. You have to let me know in the comments below what you think. Card number 7 includes the wonderful Better Press system. I'm a big fan of these plates, and I wanted to experiment to see how well the Better Press would work with the larger watercolour card. So this is similar in texture to the cotton press card that Spellbinders provide with the Better Press, but I haven't really used it before when it has been coloured up, so I really was experimenting here. I cut myself a couple of pieces and then I lined up the plate, and inked up the plate itself using VersaFine Clear. I do have some Better Press inks, but I wanted to cover a larger area quickly. If you want more details on these products, then you can look at my various playlists. I do have one for the Better Press, but I wanted to go through the techniques and the ideas rather than providing a whole list of products. But I was so pleased with the result of this, and I thought I would give it another quick go. I didn't have quite as much ink on the second piece of card, but I wanted to keep using up all of the pieces, and then I decided how I was going to use them afterwards. The idea of the Better Press is that you're going to end up with an etched result as well as the inking. I have to say that that wasn't really obvious when I had used these pieces, but I really like this plate and I really like the results of the design against the colour cardstock, and they make really striking backgrounds. So this card ended up being relatively simple, but I would definitely use the Better Press again for my ink backgrounds. I used another Spellbinders die to make a relatively simple shaped card, and I backed it onto some gold glitter card, and I think it is relatively simple but very striking. And I think that the colours are so random that you wouldn't think to put them together yourself, but when you see the Better Press plate and the colours together, you're going to want to try more of these. I'm using another Spellbinders product. This time I'm working with the 3D embossing folder. It's also got a die within it, so I'm looking for the raised embossed area, and then I'm adding in the die, and then I'll run this through the machine. I've got lots of other embossing folder techniques. I'll leave you the video link up above. But all I'm doing here is creating a vintage effect on top of the ink background, and then I'm going to separate those two areas to create two cards, and then I'm using the extra piece of card to stamp out some butterflies, and they will become the focal points on the embossed background. I'm positioning the butterflies so that I've got a multitude of colours within the wings, because that's more interesting than one block colour, and I'm using the same colour palette with the ink choices so that everything ties in together. So here's card number 8. So you've got the larger panel that was embossed with the black ink, and then I've tied in the butterflies to the topper. Then we've got card number 9, where I've used the lower part of the panel, similar sort of idea, but I added a little bit of gold gilding wax to that bottom panel. But I really love the colourways of these cards. It's so surprising the effects that you can get. And then because I had also used the deboss side of the embossing folder, I've discovered that by using this larger cutout die, I could get some really cool looking toppers, and these two cards were a real pleasant surprise. So you could see the details of the deboss with the black ink and those beautiful vibrant blues, and then the excess with the yellows and the reds, and I highlighted them both with one piece of gold glitter card. So I was really pleased with those cards, and I would definitely recommend trying out your embossing folders and your black inks and your die cuts. Really fun technique and great looking cards. Watch my videos before, you know I love keeping the scrap pieces and cutting them down to a 1/2 inch in width, and by doing this I can then stick them to another piece of card and make a completely unique background. I think this one worked particularly well. I really enjoyed creating these cards. It's a really nice way to spend a few hours in your craft room, getting out the craft supplies, going back to basics, just trying a little bit of colour with a different stamp or some dies that you've forgotten that you've had. And it's about building up those layers, not worrying about if something goes wrong, because at the end of the day it's only a piece of paper and you end up with really unique looking cards. So we've only used a few pieces of paper, but we've made all of the backgrounds, all of the die cuts. The only real extras were the sentiments and the sequins, and possibly a little bit of glitter card here and there. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you have enjoyed this process video as much as I have enjoyed making it. I look forward to welcoming you back to Elizabeth Hogarth Designs very soon. Take care. Bye bye. Happy crafting.